pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. In the next 2 hours, we're going to be looking at a number of different myths. The first hour will be Everyday Myths in Light of the Gospel. That's the subtitle of this book, This Is Our Time. We'll be looking at some of the myths that we deal with in society and in culture. Second hour, we'll get into the news cycle once again, talk about some of the myths and misrepresentations on everything from the healthcare debate right now to some of the political issues. So there'll be lots of things that we will talk about. And as we go through this, if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Trevin Wax is the author of this new book, This Is Our Time, Everyday Myths in the Light of the Gospel. He is the Bible and reference publisher at LifeWay Christian Resources, an individual that has served as a former missionary to Romania, which we'll get into in just a minute. Also, perhaps you've seen his blog at the Gospel Coalition. I've seen some of his YouTube videos. Matter of fact, one which relates to chapter 7 in his book, Sex is Everything, Sex is Nothing. We'll get into some of those topics in just a minute. He was named as one of the more profound and influential millennials of that generation, has his PhD in theology from Southeastern Seminary, and before that had a master's degree from Southern Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. Trevin, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Good to be with you guys.
You know, one of the things that I do quite often, as many of our listeners know, because I take a break, is I go to Budapest, Hungary every year, or just about every year, to speak at Word of Life and to teach there. Some of my colleagues go to Romania, and so they fly into Bucharest instead of Budapest, and we've even had people from Romania here. And you use that example early on in your book as a former missionary to Romania, because in Romania you had to portray a myth. And that is, the communists are the good guys. Now, don't believe what you know in the past. These are individuals that are going to bring about this new state, and this is going to be great, and this is going to be an opportunity for you to live in this utopia that Karl Marx promised. And even as Ceausescu and others took over, there was this attempt to show this myth, and yet eventually, like, for example, your father-in-law and others were able to see through that myth. And you use that as an example that whether we're in a communist country, a capitalist country, whether we're in a country that gives us a great deal of freedom or very little freedom, sometimes we're surrounded by a lot of these myths, and as Christians, we need to begin to see through those, don't we?
That's absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that has inspired me when I think about my father-in-law, and not just him, but many Romanian believers during the communist era, is how they were able to view their world from a Christian perspective, from a Christian worldview. They were so immersed in the Bible and in a scriptural understanding of the world that they could see through a lot of the propaganda and a lot of the myths that were being foisted upon them by at that time, it was basically a dictatorship, a tyrannical government. And, we don't face the same challenge here in the United States, thankfully, but there certainly are plenty of myths out in our society, and I think the challenge for us is to ask ourselves the questions, are we equipped as believers to live faithfully in the time that God has called us to be faithful in? Are we equipped to see through some of the myths that people in our world so easily fall for, so that we can show how the gospel is true, is good, and is beautiful, and how we can put our full confidence in it?
Let me just mention that this book is endorsed. Matter of fact, there's about 5 pages of endorsements by a lot of individuals that have been on this program, including the foreword by Marvin Olasky, a good friend that we've known for decades. And so, again, the book is entitled This Is Our Time. It's a B&H book. Of course, we have information about Trevin Wax on our website, as well as about the book, in case you would want to order it. And one of the things, Trevin, we've talked about in the past with Philip Johnson is having a baloney detector. Use a different phrase, a lie detector. Even say that there are lie detector Christians. Talk about that, if you might.
Well, I think I put Christians today into two different camps and say we ought to actually transcend them both. What I call lie detector Christians and complementary Christians. Lie detector Christians are those who have what you just mentioned, the baloney test. They can the filter that basically they can see through the lies that are on display in our world very quickly, and they are eager to expose them, to show how the Bible is true, how the worldviews of people in our world are false. And so they can see through myths, whether it be in entertainment or the television shows they watch, the politics, the things that they follow. They're able to see these different philosophies, and they're able to see how they are false. Complementary Christians, on the other hand, tend to see what are the deeper longings in the lives of people in society. And so sometimes complementary Christians will go to this extreme of just affirming whatever it is that people already think about the world, what they want to be true about the world, how they view Christianity or view the world already. And so complementary Christians sometimes forget to bring the gospel's challenge, that sense of confrontation. Lie detector Christians, though, can sometimes forget to connect the lies that we believe to the deeper longings to why we believe those lies.
Right.
And I think faithful Christians have to be skilled in doing both of those things, and that's the challenge that I'm hoping to do well in the book.
Well, again, we're going to have about an hour with you, and the first half of the book kind of looks at some of the habits and things that kind of affect us day to day, and we'll start off maybe with smartphones, which is perfect in light, and in just a minute I'll explain why. And the second half, kind of some of the larger myths. And one of the things, Trevin, we do is every Wednesday, which will be tomorrow, we have our Millennial Roundtable, and that'll be Nick Pitts will be with us, and Allie Beth Stuckey, and oftentimes we bring in other guests and individuals, and so we really kind of talk about millennials. And you're kind of the older millennial. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And then on Thursday, we're actually going to be talking about a book that is entitled What Your Phone is Doing to You. So your first chapter is Your Phone is a Myth Teller, but you sit in a good situation in that you actually grew up for a time without a cell phone. For the younger millennials out there, they've never known a time when they did not have a phone, if not in their hands, in the hands of their parents, and never can think of a time when they didn't have access to Google, Wikipedia, and all those kinds of things. So speak to that issue for just a minute, because you use this as a great illustration of how, in some respects, even this technology has affected the way we perceive the world.
It is changing so rapidly, isn't it? I mean, when you think about even the difference between myself on the older end of the millennial spectrum to people that are 10 years younger than me, there really is a difference in how cell phones have spread across the country, and smartphones especially are being used in so many different places now. So I think it's important for us to take a step back and to ask ourselves the question, what is our use of this technology actually doing to us? And I'm very glad you're going to have that discussion on what the phone is doing to you. I'm assuming that's Tony Reinke that you'll have on. A wonderful book.
Yes.
That goes into greater detail than I can do in even a chapter. But I think we need to ask ourselves some heart questions. Why are we constantly looking at our phones? Why are we distracted so easily? Why do we go to our phones constantly to see if people have liked or have somehow responded or commented on our Facebook pictures that we've just put on, our Instagram, or what we've just said on Twitter? What's actually going on in the heart? I think it's one thing to simply say, the phone is bad, therefore you should do away with it, and life would be a whole lot simpler. Well, most of us, we can't go back to that kind of world because our jobs require us to have a certain amount of connection, and so we've got to figure out, what does it look like to be faithful in this moment, in this time, with the phones that we have.
We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Trevin Wax right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, during our Millennial Roundtable discussion on radio, one of the co-hosts noticed on his phone that ESPN was laying off 100 people. At the time, I thought that there were probably at least two reasons for this executive decision. First, millennials aren't as likely to watch ESPN since they feel they can get anything they need for free from the internet. And second, many people have turned off ESPN because their left-wing politics is turning them off. These are two of the major reasons for the layoffs. The economic reasons for ESPN's troubles have to do with the fact that many, not just millennials, are cutting the cord for cable. The sports network has lost 12 million subscribers. Also, ESPN overpaid for broadcast rights, which has become a huge problem since many subscribers have left and others stopped watching. Paying too much while you're losing subscribers and have declining ratings is the major reason for the layoffs. But in addition to the economic reason is a political reason. ESPN executives and on-air talent came to the wrong conclusion that bringing political discussions into the network would improve ESPN's ratings. This is not what sports viewers actually wanted. Clay Travis put it this way: Middle America wants to pop a beer and listen to sports talk. They don't want to be lectured about why Caitlyn Jenner is a hero, Michael Sam is the new Jackie Robinson of sports, and Colin Kaepernick is the Rosa Parks of football. Sean Davis explained the viewer's frustration. You want to watch the Lakers game? Okay, but first we're going to hear about Caitlyn Jenner. Want some NFL highlights? Well, we'll get to those eventually, but coming up next will be a discussion about how North Carolina is run by racist, homophobic bigots. It wasn't a smart move to try to turn ESPN into MSNBC with sports added. Viewers wanted to watch sports, not be lectured about left-wing politics. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Trevin Wax. Again, his book is entitled This Is Our Time, Everyday Myths in Light of the Gospel. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about him or read his blog, we have a link to his blog at the Gospel Coalition on our website, pointofview.net. Also, of course, I have a link to this book. You perhaps will be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if not, we've made it very easy for you to order it online. You can get it in Kindle or paperback, and just fascinating, just lots of great myths that sometimes we adopt uncritically and need to think about with some level of discernment. Trevin, for just a minute, let's also talk about another aspect of these phones. You referred to it, that it makes you the center of the universe, and it reminds me of some conversations we've had with Dr. Kathy Cook. Her books, a book in particular, Screens and Teens. There is a sense in which this technology reinforces that. Now, I recognize teenagers are already sort of narcissistic anyway, so we got that. But so it's not like the technology created it, but I think the technology enhanced it and reinforced it. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would want to say that not just teenagers. I think all of us tend to deal with narcissism and selfishness and self-centeredness is just part of the default nature of the human heart, I'd say. I think you're absolutely right, though. The phone actually feeds that sense of self-centeredness, and the reason is because just think about everything that the phone is geared toward. You are the one who decides what apps you want, how you want those apps to be tailored to your own needs, to your own desires. You can basically form the phone to be the kind of device that you want it to be, that you need it to be, and then it constantly notifies you and updates you when people are thinking of you. It's basically flattering you with all of this attention over and over and over again. And so I think this is something that a lot of times Christians think, well, if I just make sure there's nothing bad coming to me on my phone, if I have the right filters or if I have the right accountability, then I'll make sure it's not pornography or something. And I want to say amen to that, but shouldn't we ask the deeper question also of just what does the phone itself and its constant reminders, its constant attention that it gives us, what is that in itself doing to our own hearts? How is that shaping our interactions with our family members and with our friends and coworkers and people at church? I think that's the question that we have to ask when we're talking about the phone.
You know, we've had Rod Dreyer on, and of course his book is The Benedict Option. And again, he's not calling for us to go into a monastery, but he is calling for us to begin to reevaluate this attention-grabbing culture, the fast-paced, frenetic lifestyle that we have. I mean, if I remember right, don't we have some Psalms that tell us to be still and know that I am God? And it seems to me that that's difficult when these devices certainly interrupt even the possibility of quietness, stillness, meditation. What are your thoughts?
I think, the Bible does say, be still and know that I am God. I think a lot of times our phones say, stay busy and you'll think you're God. Like that's basically
Great line.
what our phone is telling us. So I agree. I think we're going to have to be intentional about the time we spend on our phones, what we're doing on our phones, how we're using these devices. There are wonderful things that come to us from these devices, too. I mean, from the app that tracks how many steps I've walked a day to make sure that I keep in step, to the app that tells me about the weather. I mean, I don't want us to have an overly negative approach to the phone, but surely we as Christians who want to be faithful to the Lord in this time, we need to ask some questions about intentionality. Mm-hmm. What is our phone doing to us? What are we doing on our phones? Why are we constantly on our phones? Let's ask those deeper questions and then come to see what faithfulness will look like as believers in the 21st century.
Well, let's, if we can, keep moving, because you've just got so many great chapters here, and I want to give people a feel for some of the extent of what you write about. And in Chapter 2, you talk about entertainment, which you point out is so prevalent nowadays that we can hardly imagine life without some of these forms of diversion. George Will, even in a column just came out the other day, reminds us what it would be like to be a billionaire in the early part of the 20th century, and you would feel like you had this incredibly deprived life, because even people that are poor, lower income, if they have access to a television or a phone, they have air conditioning, they have so much more than we had just even a century ago. But one of the things you really want us to understand is, again, you're not down on phones, you're not down on entertainment, but again, it has its place. And so this is what you're really calling us to begin to reevaluate with discernment.
That's right. I would think entertainment in some form or fashion is just part of the human experience, because entertainment at the end of the day is generally about stories. It's the stories that are told in the songs that we sing, and the stories that are made popular in the movies we watch, and even before movies, the books that we would read, or even the tales around the campfire that have been told for as long as human beings can remember. The stories are the stuff of life, I like to say, because we imagine ourselves as storied kind of creatures. We have a birth, we have a death, we have a life story, we say. And so I think it's important for us as Christians, if we're going to be intentional about the entertainment that we consume, for us to be able to see where in these stories that we're seeing on the television series, or what we're watching on Netflix, or what movie we're watching, what songs we're singing, where do those stories align with the biblical storyline of the Bible? Are there some parallels or some themes that may align with what the Bible says to be true about our world? And then where are those places where the stories of the world diverge from what Scripture teaches? I think as Christians, we've got to be able to take a look at our stories, whether in whatever form they come to us, and see them from a Christian perspective, from a Christian worldview. And I think we'll find out that Hollywood often is against us, but there are some places where Hollywood can't help it. They fall into some of the major themes of redemption and self-sacrifice and forgiveness and things that we see in Scripture. And the reason is because this isn't just a good story that the Bible tells. It's the true story of our world, and it's the greatest story ever told. So all these other stories want to borrow from it. I think we have to be able to see both of those things in what we receive in entertainment.
Well, and again, I think this is where this idea of discernment is so key because, for example, yesterday we had Ray and Sue Boland on talking about the Mind Games Conference, and I've had kids that after they've gone through that said, you've kind of ruined the movies because now I'm watching a movie and I'm thinking about what I'm getting perspective here. Or, we've had John Stone Street on. We talk about, again, trying to have your worldview glasses on. And that's not a bad thing because when you're watching a television program, you're watching a movie, you're going to an internet website, you're listening to music, obviously you can enjoy it for what it is, but there is a message being presented because the artist, the musician, the internet web browser, webmaster, the actor, the director, they have a worldview. And so I think it's really important for us to have that level of discernment, don't you think?
I think so too. And whenever someone says, I just want to be able to enjoy a movie. I don't want to even think about anything. I just want to turn off my brain and my filter and just enjoy, kind of veg out. I say, well, is that really the best way for us to be faithful, to stop thinking? I can't imagine the Apostle Paul, who tells us to not be conformed to the image of this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. I can't imagine him saying, you just need to turn your mind off and just receive whatever information or whatever inspiration may come to you from a movie or a television show. Now, that doesn't mean we have to be continual cultural critics, that we can never simply enjoy a movie for what it is. But certainly, as Christians who want to be faithful, we need to be aware of the kinds of things that are coming to us from Hollywood and to see where they align with Scripture and where they don't, as just part of what it means for us to be good thinking Christians who believe that these movies do have an impact on us. They form our desires, our hearts, our emotions. They inspire us in certain ways. They may frighten us in certain ways. This is the kind of thing that a good story does, and I think it's important for us, yes, to enjoy good stories, but also to be aware of how those stories work on our hearts.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll spend a little bit more time today talking with Dr. Trevin Wax. The book is entitled This Is Our Time, and just as he was pointing out, Paul warns us not to be taken captive by false philosophy, also tells us later on to actually take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. So one of the ways in which you certainly can benefit from his writing is, of course, to get a copy of this book, This Is Our Time. It's published by B&H Books. We also have a link to the Gospel Coalition. Some of his most recent blog posts have been things like the future of Christianity may be different than you think, as well as the 7 lists that he puts together there. Pastors, the Bible is the best thing you've got going, and a variety of other issues and topics that he addressed. It's all on our website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, don't forget that we are dependent upon your financial support to keep this program going. And so if you have never taken the time to maybe even click on that button that says Donate Now, a one-time gift would be appreciated. But again, from time to time, I recommend that some of you might consider just joining us for as little as $1 a day. That's $30 a month, $360 a year. That allows you to be part of the Truth Team. We send you all sorts of great material. And again, you are helping us to continue these kind of intelligent conversations every day. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about this issue of myths, but especially looking at this issue of happiness. And there are some very important aspects of that, which we'll talk about with Trevin Wax. And we'll do that right after these important messages.
When listeners call in, we never know what they're going to say, and sometimes they shock us, like Jacob did.
We as Christians, we should learn to support ministries like yours that is reaching out and shining light into darkness. This is why Satan has such a great grip on America and the world, is because the world support their own. They will spend billions of dollars to make sure they are heard. The Lord is working a great work through Point of View.
We are thankful for listeners like Jacob and you who become part of our family, a real part, by sacrificing to support the work of Point of View. Take Jacob's words to heart and support us today. Enable us to continue shining God's light into the darkness. We honestly cannot do it without you. Visit pointofview.net. Look for the Donate Now button or call 800-347-5151 or send a gift to Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have with us Dr. Trevin Wax with us. And again, this book is entitled This Is Our Time, Everyday Myths in the Light of the Gospel. Before we get back to that, Trevin, I thought for just a minute we'd talk about, as we have a link there to the various blogs at the Gospel Coalition, people can actually sign up to receive your blog and talk about some of the resources that might be available to them, as well as, of course, this book and some of the things they would be able to read on a regular basis.
Yes, I have been blogging for more than 10 years now on a regular basis, daily for many years, and now usually 3 to 4 times a week. I love the blog because I'm able to get out things of interest that are not necessarily something to write a whole book about, but an article that might be helpful. Just last week, for example, I wrote about this new Netflix series that is highly controversial about teen suicide, 13 Reasons Why. It's the kind of thing that, when there's something that is taking place in the culture or perhaps politically or in the church, something that we should be aware of or something that we should think through together, I like to use the blog as a place to be able to share articles that people can find helpful and hopefully can share with their friends as well.
I might just mention, too, that every year we promote a Christian Writers Conference that we do here in the Dallas area, and people from all over the country come to it. But one of yours that you posted recently was on writing, branding, and platform building. So for those of you that are budding writers, you might want to find that out there as well. And you can also find some of Trevin's books, including this one, This Is Our Time, Everyday Myths in the Light of the Gospel. Let's get into this issue of happiness. You've got a couple of chapters, one, the North Pole and the Pursuit of Happiness, and then Shopping for Happiness. But first of all, this idea of the North Pole. Our listeners up in the state of Alaska are a lot closer to the North Pole than the rest of us, but you use that as a great illustration, kind of like our GPS, to understand where we're going. Explain if you might.
Yeah, that's right. I've got this romantic vision of what Alaska is like, and I can't wait to visit there someday. But I think of all of the attempts that were made to get to the North Pole. And if you read some of the history, and I think the history of trying to explore the Arctic territory is fascinating. There were some very strange maps that were going around during the 1800s, or ideas about what life was really like up there. For the longest time, people thought that up at the North Pole, it was actually warm water, and that there was a polar ocean up there, that if you could just get through the layers, the ring of ice that was around that polar that North Pole area, then you'd be able to travel the world much faster. You could go over the pole, and that commerce would be different. So there are all these reasons why people wanted that to be true. And I use that as a good illustration because after expedition after expedition runs into those rocks of ice up there, and so many explorers lost their lives. I use that as an example, saying, a lot of people have this idea that they want to reach this North Pole, whatever it might be, whether it be success or status or significance, and yet they have the wrong map. They are pursuing this idea of what's going to make them happy, and yet they're going to run into the icy rocks of reality because there's only one thing that we were made for, and that is to know God, to love God, to enjoy Him, to glorify Him forever. And so if your North Pole is anything other than that, and you if you are trying to achieve happiness in some way, shape, or form that the world will give you, you are following a faulty map. And at some point, you are going to realize that that thing that you've devoted your life to, that you've sailed after, is not going to satisfy. And I think it's important for us as Christians to know that we, as human beings, we are happiness-seeking creatures. The question is, though, happiness, our joy, our eternal satisfaction, it's only in God. Our hearts were made for Him.
Well, again, a lot of people, after they achieve a level of success, find out it wasn't what they thought it would be. You use some examples in your book, and of course, history is just replete with those kind of examples. But another way in which people try to find happiness is through wealth or possessions, not just status and success. And that brings us to another chapter, Shopping for Happiness. And you even make the argument that I think if some people from previous centuries were to look into our closets, they go, What is wrong with these people? Explain, if you might.
Well, I'm using that example because of the television show Hoarders.
Yes.
Or those.
Yes.
You watch those shows and you think, oh, these people have a condition; they can't let go of this stuff. And then I have to wonder, what if people from other parts of the world were to see our closets, our garages, or people from other time periods throughout history? The chapter on shopping and consumerism and just what it means to pursue wealth, that was the hardest. I'll just be honest, that's the hardest chapter that it was for me to write, because we just live and breathe that cultural air. Many of us, we plot out the main points of our lives on this trajectory of climbing the ladder of our career or to success. We think of our life in terms of a trajectory from less wealth to more wealth, the bigger house, more cars, the better vacations. So many of us plot our life story that way. And so this was a difficult chapter to write because I really had to work hard to get out of our culture enough to be able to see it from the outside in, to really let the scriptures challenge me here. It's also difficult to write. I do write about my sister's house fire, actually, that took place a couple of years ago. My sister and her husband and their family lost their home to a fire. And learning from them, listening to them, it's a deeply personal chapter to write, I think, to tell their story in that chapter. But sometimes there are lessons that only you learn through difficulty and through heartache and through trials and tribulations. And that's one of the takeaways that I think will remain with me forever from working on that particular chapter.
Sure. And in one of my more recent books, in the Biblical Point of View series, I have a chapter there on consumerism and materialism. So it isn't just what's in your closet, it's what's in your heart, the way you go to church, the way you perceive the pastor, the church, all sorts of other issues are very relevant. But I want to keep moving because you've got some other very important chapters. And one of those, Never at Home in the City of Man. And you really kind of take us back to Augustine. You have the fall of Rome, AD 410, and Augustine really helps Christians recognize that you really don't want to get too tied to the city of man, because there's also a city of God, and there are two cities, the city of man and the city of God. And you use this to help us understand that sometimes we get so earthly minded we're no heavenly good.
That is one of the important takeaways, I think, for our day. It is so easy for us to get wrapped up in what's going on in our current culture politically. So easy for us to pin all of our hopes and dreams. But at the same time, we have to have a higher perspective. We have to be able to see that no matter who we may align with in this present world, at the end of the day, we are waiting for the kingdom to come that Jesus Christ will bring. We're waiting for the return of Christ. We're waiting for, that's what we pray for when we say, thy kingdom come. That's ultimately what we are going for and what we're hoping for. And anything else, if we were to put our hopes in, is only going to disappoint and dissatisfy and lead us to make bad decisions. And so I use that story from Augustine to help Christians today to be able to get out above some of the political noise that comes to us constantly through news and social media and cable news networks and things like that. All of those things are important, but we need to be able to get up above the noise and see things from a Christian perspective.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Trevin Wax. And you gotta love a book where one of the quotes comes from Inigo Montoya, The Princess Bride. You keep using that word, but I don't think that's what means what you think it does, and it has to do with the next topic we'll get into, and the issue of marriage. And if you'd like to read this book, if you'd like to know more about it, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. It is entitled, This Is Our Time, Everyday Myths in Light of the Gospel. It would be a great antidote to, again, the worldliness that we find ourselves in. It would be a great sermon series. So I might just mention, for those of you that are pastors or Bible fellowship leaders, Sunday school leaders, small group leaders, this would be a great study as well. And we'll talk about some of the resources that you could actually use to put that together. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about Trevin Wax, we again have a picture of him. As you click the see more, you can go to the website, which will allow you to read his blog. And I hope that you'll take the time to receive that on a regular basis. We also have the book, which is available if you would certainly not be able to find it in your local bookstore, and I suspect it'll probably be there, but if not, we certainly give you an opportunity to order it both in paperback and Kindle. We'll come back and talk about marriage and a few other the broad issues, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. A case out of Oklahoma mixes the doctrine of church autonomy with the intrigue of a spy novel. A Syrian man found his way to the First Presbyterian Church USA of Tulsa, Oklahoma. There he converted to Christianity and asked to be baptized. He was, and though he requested confidentiality, the church followed its Book of Church Order, listing the record of his baptism on the church's website. When the man returned to Syria, he was kidnapped, tortured, and only escaped death by killing his guard and fleeing the country. After he returned to the United States, he sued the Presbyterian Church, alleging that the publication of his baptism led to his kidnap and torture. But the Oklahoma Supreme Court declined to review the matter, citing the church autonomy doctrine. According to that doctrine, churches are free from government interference when handling its internal religious affairs, including baptism. Since it is the practice and custom of the Presbyterian Church to publicly celebrate baptisms, the court could not adjudicate the dispute. While churches must exercise wisdom in following its customs to avoid unnecessary danger, how a church decides matters of faith and practice is rightly beyond the reach of the judiciary to review. As the U.S. Supreme Court said in 1952, this doctrine, quote, radiates a spirit of freedom for religious organizations and independence from secular control or manipulation. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In the few minutes remaining, Trevin, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the chapters on marriage and sex. Again, I mentioned earlier that there's a very good video out. Of course, some of these are, matter of fact, I imagine every one of these chapters sooner or later will be available on video if they aren't. Of course, I saw the one that related to Chapter 7 on sex. But let's get to marriage in just a minute. As I said before, you got to love a guy that quotes from Princess Bride to make a point. But the point you're making is that marriage has been so redefined to mean, well, I can take a break from marriage, or I can redefine marriage, or I can have an open marriage. it does seem to me we have a cultural message right now that says you can really define marriage any way you want. But the Bible's pretty clear that it gives us a biblical definition of marriage that is supposed to apply to all individuals at all times.
Yeah, that quote from The Princess Bride, which comes in handy a lot, actually, in our day and age, is
Yes.
It comes because I was reading an article in Time magazine about a woman who decided to take a year off
Yes.
from her marriage,
Mm-hmm.
and go find other lovers and things. And that's what I thought of Inigo Montoya. You keep using that word, but I do not think that word means what you say it means, right? What do you think it means? Because the very nature of marriage is that it is binding, that it is a
Yes.
vow, that it is through thick and through thin. Whether you're bored or whether you're excited, the whole point of marriage is that this is a vow that is to sustain love. It's a promise that's to be made over the long haul. And so I do think we've got a lot of cultural work to do in our churches to make sure that it's not only true that the Bible affirms marriage as between a man and a woman for life. It's also, though, that the Bible's vision of marriage is not based on the same things that our culture bases marriage on. A lot of people in our society, and I would even say in our churches, believe that marriage is ultimately a dignifying, a government sort of seal of approval of two people who have a romantic attachment. And you actually see this even in Christian circles sometimes, this idea that it's basically marriage is all about the romantic feelings, the intensity of our emotional feelings toward another person. If that's all that marriage is, then it definitely seems discriminatory and somehow wrong to not allow for same-sex marriage. But the Bible's view of marriage is different than that. The Bible's view of marriage is that this is the bringing together of the two halves of humanity for their procreation, for the good of the next generation, for the world. It's the link in the chain that takes us back to the beginning of time. And so you have this public understanding of marriage that is very central to the Bible, not just a sort of privatized romantic attachment. I think as Christians, if we're going to do good work here in this area, we have got to make sure that we don't just hold the line on opposing same-sex marriage, but that we also do some digging even into how our own church members may foresee how they may define marriage, and to say, some of the ideas you may have about marriage come from the world and don't come from Scripture, and we need to test everything according to Scripture.
Yes, especially with views about living together, divorce, all sorts of other issues. But I did want to get to the chapter on sex, because one of the things I found very helpful in watching your video a while back was you have two really radically different views of sex in our culture. One is sex is nothing, and so, casual sex, no big deal and everything. Or sex is everything, it's the validation of who I am. And so we can see that those two extremes, neither which are biblical, are nevertheless so part of our culture that it's affecting your generation and all generations. It's also affecting our perception of marriage. So this really is at the core of a lot more than just the issue of how you pursue and actually perceive this idea of sexual relations.
It's true. It actually goes even deeper than that. I would say it comes down to the core of what it means to be human, what it means to be a person made in the image of God, what it means to be made male and female. It really goes down to our what Bible scholars would say is our anthropology, our belief about humanity. And so these issues that we are dealing with today are not on the periphery. They're not on the side. Sometimes you see people when it comes to I see people in society and in left-wing progressive evangelical churches or whatnot that want to say, we can just agree to disagree on the nature of marriage, or we can just agree to disagree on sexuality and what Christian morality teaches. And one of the things that I have been saying and will continue to say again and again is, no, these issues actually get to the very heart of what the Bible teaches about humanity, about redemption. These issues go very quickly to the core of our faith. It's not a surprise, and it shouldn't. It certainly shouldn't be surprising to anyone that when the Bible compares the gospel to marriage, the emphasis is on difference, is on being united to Christ. That vision of marriage there is dependent on complementarity, on male-female relationship coming together in the sight of God and making those vows. So I would just push back against those who say that at the end of the day we can just agree to disagree, and say, no, this issue is fundamental. This is going to be a dividing line in the next generation for sure.
Wow. Just about out of time. I want to talk about what resources might be available. Of course, this book is out, but I know some people might want to find a little bit more. I mentioned some of your videos and a blog, so tell us if people would like to teach some of this in a small group or a Sunday school class, or maybe even use this as a series of sermons from the pulpit. What resources might you have available to some of the individuals that would like to use those?
Well, I would point people first to the book, This Is Our Time, and then also I have been very heavily involved in a curriculum for the last several years called the Gospel Project. It is a curriculum for all ages. There's a kids version, a student version, and an adult version. And what that does, a little bit different than what This Is Our Time does, it takes you through the main stories of the Bible over a 3-year period. You go through the entire Bible chronologically, and you're able to see how all the Bible fits together. Now, the reason why I connect that to what we've been talking about this entire hour is because it's very important for if we're going to have people who are shaped by a Christian worldview in the next generation, they're going to need to be immersed into the storyline of the Bible. It's hard to spot false worldviews if you're not grounded in the Christian worldview. And that's one of the things I'm very excited about with the Gospel Project, is that it, over time, equips people to see how all the Bible points to Christ, but then how also the Bible gives us the framework from which we view all of reality and helps us in the daily decisions that we make.
So again, check out the Gospel Project. Of course, he is as well the Bible and reference publisher for LifeWay Christian Resources. So check out LifeWay, because that's very good as well. And also the publisher of the Christian Standard Bible. We, of course, have a link to the Gospel Coalition. So there's a number of ways that you can connect up with Dr. Trevin Wax. And Trevin, I'm so glad that we were able to do that. Love to have you join us sometime, maybe in our Millennial Roundtable. But thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you for having me.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into some of the myths and misrepresentations of some of the things in that political realm. We haven't done much of that in the last couple of days. Thought it would be good before we finish off the day. And so let me encourage you, if you have some comments or questions, we'll open up the phones and give you a chance to interact on those, because we're hearing all sorts of things being said. We're going to do our best to try to do a little bit of a correction in that regard and give you kind of an update on what is happening in the political arena, since so much has been taking place. Tomorrow, as I mentioned, is our Millennial Roundtable. We'll have a lot to cover in that regard. And then Thursday, we'll be getting into some other discussion points. I know June Hunt will be in studio with us, and we have some other conversations, including the one about what the phone is doing to you. And of course, Friday is our weekend edition, where we'll look at a number of issues in the news. So a lot is taking place, and so I hope you'll join us every single day. As we go to a break, don't forget that if you'd like to listen to this again or find out more about Trevin Wax, simply go to the website pointofview.net. My commentary today is on ESPN and some of the reasons why there's been a declining viewership, and some of it has to do to some of the political issues. And most importantly, I hope that some of you might click on that button that says Donate Now and support this ministry. Let's take a break. We're going to get back into the news cycle, all that coming up right after this.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View, so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to spend some time talking about some of these other myths, and that has to do with especially this debate on health care. We'll get into a few of the others in just a few minutes, but if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. There are a couple I want to talk about. One that seems to have a life of its own. It's almost one that you shouldn't have to respond to, but the Washington Post finally had to do a fact check on it and gave it 4 Pinocchios. You've probably seen it if you're out there on the internet at all, especially if you have some liberal friends that have bought this idea that now the American Health Care Act, which is kind of the repeal and replace of the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, actually would prevent women who have been raped from actually getting any kind of treatment, because rape would be a pre-existing condition. We'll also get into an argument that was made in the New York Times that if indeed you repeal Obamacare, this could threaten the ability to create jobs in America, which again, because the fact that it was in the New York Times really requires we have to talk about some of those. But the bigger issue is this. I think all of us by now are just saying, can we get to a point where we really could just have an honest discussion about health care? I mean, I recognize we're a real divided country. No Republicans voted for Obamacare. Now, as far, at least in the House of Representatives, no Democrats voted for the repeal and replace, the American Health Care Act. So that's the first one. It's almost impossible to even modify, much less remove an entitlement once somebody achieves it. And of course, people are really fearful of change. And if you haven't seen this, all you have to do is go to any of the town hall meetings that have been held in the last couple of months, any that will be held here between now and the fall. And people are shouting and people are holding signs. And again, if you're concerned that your child or you will be affected negatively by some decision, I can understand the emotion here. But at the same time, we have traveled down, I think, the wrong road for a long time. As we said on Friday when we had Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford in studio, we really haven't had anything like a free market in health care and medical insurance since the 1960s. 7 out of every health care dollars are paid either by Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurance companies. Well, you can see that lack of any kind of free market is one of the reasons why cost of health care has gone up, no matter which policy you have, whether you have Obamacare or what you want to call this Trump care, Ryan care, whatever you want to call it, or the actual terms are the Affordable Care Act and the American Health Care Act. So those are all things that make it difficult to talk about this issue. But where angels fear to tread, I'm going to head into that anyway. And the first one has to do with this myth that has been around. And it isn't just one that appeared in maybe some obscure internet comment. The New York Magazine said, in Trump's America, being sexually assaulted could make your health insurance more expensive. CNN, rape and domestic violence could be pre-existing conditions. Or there was even an op-ed that appeared in the Washington Post that argued that under the Republican health care plan, sexual assault could be considered a pre-existing condition. And so this is the viral claim that's being made. There's a part of me that says, should we even have to respond to this? Because you can know darn well that if indeed that was something that really was in the bill anywhere, this would have shown up in the debate and certainly would have been brought out in the oral arguments, the testimony, the controversy, the committee meetings, all the rest. Now, was this pushed through too quickly? Yes, I think you can acknowledge that. But again, this idea that rape or being sexually assaulted would be a pre-existing condition is something that at its face makes no sense. And nevertheless, you might say, okay, so where did the idea even come from? Even if you've got kind of a biased view on the Republican plan and you are convinced that the American Health Care Act is a bad idea, where did they come up with this idea? And it so happens, as we've talked about on this program, that when there was a resistance from many of the conservative members of the House of Representatives, and those individuals known as the Freedom Caucus, whether it's Mark Meadows or, of course, Louis Gohmert's been in the program with us, or Jim Jordan, or various people like that, they actually began to be willing to vote for this particular repeal and replace the American Health Care Act if they would add this amendment. And this amendment, put forward by Tom MacArthur in New Jersey, allows states to seek waivers from continuous coverage provisions that would otherwise boost insurance rates by 30% for 1 year if a person had a lapse in insurance coverage for more than 2 months. In other words, the idea is that if indeed somebody was not responsible and they were not getting insurance and they had a pre-existing condition or developed a pre-existing condition, could we at least charge them more? Because obviously they're in a different category than the average individual. And so that amendment was added, and it allows the states, individual states, to get a waiver. But it's not a waiver to prevent coverage as much as it is a waiver to, in some cases, deal with individuals who mostly have been irresponsible in one way or another. Now, even if you accept that that could be a potential danger, you have to go back and look at the bill itself. And I'm now reading from the Washington Post, which, by the way, the Washington Post, when it looked at this, actually gave it 4 Pinocchios. 4 Pinocchios. There are only a few things that get 4 Pinocchios. I mean, you know, this is beyond some of the most outrageous lies that have ever been said in politics. 4 Pinocchios is right up there at the very top or the bottom, depending on how you look at it. And the Washington Post felt that it needed to do this because actually there was an op-ed that suggested that sexual assault or rape could be considered a pre-existing condition. So now, quoting from this particular piece in the Washington Post by Michelle Yeehee Lee, says that the American Health Care Act does not specifically address or classify rape or sexual assault as a pre-existing condition. It also would not deny coverage to anyone because of a pre-existing condition. It even goes on specifically to address when a state could actually get a waiver, and there are all sorts of protections that have existed for some time under, for example, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, which would still be in place even if indeed the American Health Care Act is passed by the United States Senate. But at this point, you might say, well, you know, this still doesn't seem like it provides enough protection. I think the final silver bullet is this. We already have at least 45 states, and in one case you can come up to all the way up to 48 states that actually have laws that prohibit health insurance companies from using a woman's status as a domestic violence survivor to deny coverage. And also we have laws, virtually every state, prohibiting insurance discrimination based on sexual assault or domestic violence. So whether you look at the law, whether you look at the waiver, whether you look at the protections that have existed and will still be in place even if we do pass in the Senate the American Health Care Act, then you also look at the states and you see that there is protection. So this is why at the end of all this discussion, the Washington Post gave this myth, and it is a myth, 4 Pinocchios. We'll come back and take on a couple of other myths right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, during our Millennial Roundtable discussion on radio, one of the co-hosts noticed on his phone that ESPN was laying off 100 people. At the time, I thought that there were probably at least two reasons for this executive decision. First, millennials aren't as likely to watch ESPN since they feel they can get anything they need for free from the internet. And second, many people have turned off ESPN because their left-wing politics is turning them off. These are two of the major reasons for the layoffs. The economic reasons for ESPN's troubles have to do with the fact that many, not just millennials, are cutting the cord for cable. The sports network has lost 12 million subscribers. Also, ESPN overpaid for broadcast rights, which has become a huge problem since many subscribers have left and others stopped watching. Paying too much while you're losing subscribers and have declining ratings is the major reason for the layoffs. But in addition to the economic reason is a political reason. ESPN executives and on-air talent came to the wrong conclusion that bringing political discussions into the network would improve ESPN's ratings. This is not what sports viewers actually wanted. Clay Travis put it this way: Middle America wants to pop a beer and listen to sports talk. They don't want to be lectured about why Caitlyn Jenner is a hero, Michael Sam is the new Jackie Robinson of sports, and Colin Kaepernick is the Rosa Parks of football. Sean Davis explained the viewer's frustration. You want to watch the Lakers game? Okay, but first we're going to hear about Caitlyn Jenner. Want some NFL highlights? Well, we'll get to those eventually, but coming up next will be a discussion about how North Carolina is run by racist, homophobic bigots. It wasn't a smart move to try to turn ESPN into MSNBC with sports added. Viewers wanted to watch sports, not be lectured about left-wing politics. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, talking about the ongoing debate and discussion about the American Health Care Act, which goes now to the United States Senate. And as I pointed out just a minute ago, this is going to be tough sledding for a lot of reasons, and that is we are a very divided country. We already had a situation in which the Affordable Care Act was passed by Democrats and no Republican voted for Obamacare. Now you have this reverse, essentially, in which you have the American Health Care Act. At least in the House of Representatives, Republicans voted for it, no Democrat voted for it. So we are a divided country, and it is one of those times where you really just wish we could, in some way, come together, because there are some really important issues that need to be addressed in this issue of health care. I've posted a couple of articles on this, Right to Health Care, which we'll talk about in just a minute, the health care mess. But I thought I'd take on just one more, if you will, myth. Now, Dr. Merrill Matthews has been on the program before, has called it fake news, so you can decide what you want to call it. But on Saturday, the New York Times had an op-ed by Nelson Schwartz and Reed Abelson called Healthcare Repeal Could Threaten the U.S. Job Engine. And it's, again, hard for me to take it too seriously, because if you say removing the size and scope of the government, removing the number of various rules and regulations, as I've shared on a number of occasions, but let me share it again. If you look at the number of regulations that have been generated by the Affordable Care Act, 20,000 pages of regulations. You can go to our Point of View Facebook page. You'll have to scan down a little bit, and you'll see a picture of those regulations stacked one on top of the other, and then the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, standing next to it. The regulations are taller than he is. We are talking about 159 new agencies. We're talking about all sorts of things that have probably changed and manipulated the market in ways that are not really very helpful to individuals trying to create a job, trying to even be able to pay their taxes, trying to even afford health care in the first place and afford health care insurance. And so it's hard to even take seriously the argument that by repealing this huge monstrosity, that would actually hurt job growth unless you're only looking at the number of people in the healthcare industry or the number of government bureaucrats. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, in his piece that he's just posted here, talks about this headline that says, again, healthcare repeal could threaten U.S. job engine. And he says, really, the real news here is that the U.S. job creation in the healthcare sector was growing rapidly long before the passage and implementation of Obamacare. The argument that is sometimes used is, well, ever since we've had the passage of the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, we've actually seen some level of job growth. The number of people employed full-time has gone up. Well, yes, and so then he goes to a document that is very easy to find, created by the Federal Reserve Bank, that shows that even before it was passed, you actually had job growth taking place. This was, if you will, the recovery. And by the way, it was a meager recovery, but okay, it was a recovery from the economic collapse that took place in 2008. So you would expect it to go up, and it was going up. So a lot of that was happening even before you had the passage of Obamacare. And it isn't the passage of 20 new Obamacare taxes and the forcing of Americans into individual mandates and those kinds of things that brought that about. And if nothing else, he points out that healthcare support staff grew from about 1.7 million to 2.2 million from 2000 to 2006. That's happening before this is passage. So you can see that the healthcare sector has been growing anyway. Why is that? Well, you have the aging of the baby boom generation. And so because of that, the population is aging and it needs more care. And it's a wealthy economy. Maybe you don't feel wealthy, but the economy itself is doing much better. And if you've looked around your own neighborhood and you've traveled anywhere along the road, you will notice that they seem to sure be building a lot more emergency rooms, a lot more hospitals, a lot more primary care facilities, and a lot of that's taking place. So what Dr. Merrill Matthews points out is that really just the opposite would take place if we come up with some kind of alternative. It could be the American Health Care Act. It could be something else that comes down the pike. But at least the proposal that went through the House and now is in front of the Senate would cut about $1 trillion in Obamacare taxes and reduce Medicare spending. And you might say, well, then how are people going to be able to afford health care? It's because instead that money goes back in your pockets as consumers, or you can begin to use it as you see fit rather than all these rules and regulations. So that's just something else to put on the table. But just before we take a break and then I take some phone calls, let me go to the two articles we've posted today that I think would be helpful. One is by Kevin Williamson, and it's entitled "The Right," and he puts that in quote, "to health care." Because what you see are more and more individuals, including even late-night talk show hosts and comedians and others, saying the first thing we have to do is acknowledge that health care is a human right. And he says, here's a thought experiment. You have 4 children, and you have 3 apples. You would like everyone to have his own apple. So you go to Congress, and you successfully persuade the House and Senate to endorse a joint resolution declaring that everyone has a right to an apple of his own. You have a ticker tape parade. It's held in your honor. You share your story on Oprah after you are invited to address the United Nations, which passes the International Convention on the Rights of these 4 kids, in particular for an individual apple each. You're visited by the souls of Mahatma Gandhi and Maria Teresa's going on and on about this. And they actually talk about how they're so grateful for what you've actually done. So then he asks the question, how many apples do you have? He says, you have 3 apples, dummy. 3. You have 4 children. Each of the children has a congressionally endorsed, UN-approved, saint-ratified right of an apple of his own, but there's one problem. You have 3 apples, and you have 4 children. Nothing has changed. And the point he's making is, and it's one that is important to recognize, is when we talk about health care, there are some obvious limits. We're not just talking about expanding what we have. Health care, as he says, is physical, not metaphysical. It consists of goods such as penicillin and heart stents and services such as oncology, attention, radiological expertise. Even if we entirely eliminated money from the equation, he says, conscripting doctors into service and nationalize the pharmaceutical factories, the basic economic questions would remain. And the point is, we can say you have a right to all of this, but at a time when we are not producing enough, because in some cases, some of those rules and regulations we just talked about that have been implemented over these last many years, we don't have an apple for each child. And so if you don't understand that, well, I don't know how else to make it, but go on to the second piece on the whole idea of the healthcare mess. Susan Stamper Brown puts it this way, we have a need to really address this healthcare issue. And he says, historians may look back over these years and wonder why the Democratic Party didn't just join with the Republicans, say, okay, we think our plan is better, but let's work together to try to find a plan, because the cleanup is going to have to, in one way or another, address this issue. Because she says we have right now people paying premiums, the equivalent of a small house payment, to pay for policies requiring $10,000 or more of out-of-pocket cost. And so you would think that if nothing else, the two parties would want to get together and solve the problem. But rather than rescue the Republicans, she says, from this particular issue, they simply want to continue to propagate the fears and lies about the health bill known as the American Health Care Act. And I just gave you a couple of those a minute ago. When we come back from the break, I'll get into a couple of the others, but it's just, again, an illustration of the frustration I think the American people are going to feel. They know that what they have right now isn't working, and they know that simply because they cannot afford some of the policies, and even if they can afford the policies, they see the deductibles are so high, and they're saying, can't we do something about it? And again, we've provided one alternative in the House, and that is the Health Care Act. But again, if the Democrats are not going to support it, it will die in the Senate, and then we'll be stuck with what we've been dealing with for these many years. So if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about what an ideal health care plan would look like, some of the things that need to be changed in order for you to be able to afford health care, and at the same time, what needs to take place in order to address those individuals who, for very significant reasons, have some kind of pre-existing condition. And the American Health Care Act has put, now it's $138 billion into these high-risk pools. But we'll need to talk about how that would work and how effective that might be. So if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back and continue our conversation and take some of your phone calls right after these messages.
When listeners call in, we never know what they're going to say, and sometimes they shock us, like Jacob did.
We as Christians, we should learn to support ministries like yours that is reaching out and shining light into darkness. This is why Satan has such a great grip on America and the world, is because the world support their own. They will spend billions of dollars to make sure they are heard. The Lord is working a great work through Point of View.
We are thankful for listeners like Jacob and you who become part of our family, a real part, by sacrificing to support the work of Point of View. Take Jacob's words to heart and support us today. Enable us to continue shining God's light into the darkness. We honestly cannot do it without you. Visit pointofview.net. Look for the Donate Now button or call 800-347-5151 or send a gift to Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Half hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about the American Health Care Act, which was passed narrowly in the House of Representatives, now in the United States Senate. And just finish off real quickly, and then I'll take some phone calls. This commentary that we've posted is the third article we've posted here by Susan Stamper Brown, cleaning up the healthcare mess. And she says, like any bill, the American Health Care Act is a work in progress and will not become law as it currently stands. But you would never know that, she says, listening to the scaremongers' stories about the Republicans' plan to kill people with pre-existing conditions by obliterating access to health care coverage. So I've mentioned that even by the Washington Post was listed as a for Pinocchio, but she goes on to say that it is a lie to say that it ditches people with pre-existing conditions. She says, as Town Hall editor Guy Benson recently pointed out, people with pre-existing conditions are offered several layers of protection, which I just mentioned a minute ago, in terms of insurers are mandated to sell plans to everyone, period. Those with pre-existing conditions who live in a state that does not seek an optional waiver from the American Health Care Act or even the Affordable Care Act, which is known as Obamacare, community rating cannot be charged more than people for a new plan. So, and she goes through a lot of the various issues, some of which I've already addressed. And so the topic that really is on the table now is, are there some things that could be changed about this bill that has now made it to the Senate that might get at least some Democratic votes, or will this be exactly what you had with the Affordable Care Act, where it is only passed with Republican votes? Because as you well know, Obamacare was only passed with Democrat votes. A lot of the problem has to do with the incredible polarization in the country. And also, I think, a political calculus, because I see some of you want to talk about that as well. And that is, the Democrats concluded that by passing the Obamacare, or the Affordable Care Act, that a lot of them lost when they ran for re-election. And that is very much the case. Now, I think some of that happened for other reasons than that. And so I think the calculus being made right now by many of the Democratic leadership is, okay, now you Republicans, you pass it, you're going to go and lose in these next elections. The argument is what I call the Pottery Barn argument. You break it, you own it. And so now, okay, Republicans, if you indeed pass this, we're going to oppose you at every step. And then when we go to the next election, which again is a year from now, but nevertheless, people always thinking about the next election, then we will be able to defeat you, if not in the primaries, say in March through June, we'll defeat you next November. Of course, that's almost 18 months away. But that, I think, is what's going on. And I think a lot of us would say, can't we get together and solve these issues? We've got major issues. We've got the problem of portability, which we talk about, and we'll talk about tomorrow probably with our roundtable discussion of the millennials. The average millennial will work at 12 to 15 different jobs over his or her lifetime. And right now, because we have the healthcare plans linked to your job, that means you're going to get 12 to different healthcare plans. That makes no sense. And you have no portability. That's one of the problems with pre-existing conditions, because you had a plan with one company A, now you go to company B, and you have to start all over again. You have some real significant unfairness in terms of tax fairness, because some of you will get your plans from your employer, and that's paid for with pre-tax dollars. Those of us that get individual plans not through our employer, like myself, we pay for that in after-tax dollars. That's not fair. And I'll get into how this could be one place where Republicans and Democrats could agree, because on the Republican side, they say what is happening right now is almost crony capitalism. And what the Democrats would say is what's happening right now in terms of the employer tax exclusion is benefiting the rich. I think there's some places where you could actually get a meeting of the minds. You could get the two to work together on some of the changes that need to take place in terms of healthcare policy. But we have such a polarized environment, it's hard to see how that's going to happen. But let's go to the phones and give you a chance to weigh in with some of your comments. We'll go to Sarah, first of all, in Georgia, WPWB. Sarah, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, I thank you for having me. I have 3 quick points, if I may: timing, coverage, and premiums. It's just hard to believe that over the past 7 years that the Republicans have from day one been complaining, but have had 7 years to work with the Democrats to come up with a solution. Now they want to scramble for replacement. That's timing. Coverage. A lot of the voters that were so against Obamacare, only because listening to the hype, especially of the Republicans and Donald Trump, now see how valuable this is for their lives. Premiums. Complaining about premiums of Obamacare. What will the premiums be like under this new bill? I think all those things need to be reflected upon and worked on. These are real life. the Democrats, as even President Obama himself, admitted there were flaws with Obamacare. They asked, let's work together. 7 years have gone by. And now, scrambling to replace it with who knows what. Higher premiums, pre-existing conditions, possibly going out of the window, and lots of other things that we don't know. Higher premiums, if I didn't already say.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I think the first question is a very appropriate one. I don't care if you're a Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. You got to say, okay, guys, you did have about 7 years to figure this out. Now, let's give credit where credit is due, because most people would not know this if you just watched mainstream media press. You have had Representative Tom Price, which put forward the Empowering Patients First Act. Now he is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, so we'll see what happens there. You had Representative Phil Rowe, who had the American Health Care Reform Act, which I think actually has morphed into the American Health Care Act, but it used to be called the American Health Care Reform Act. So, let's give credit where credit was due. There were some individuals who actually crafted some things that address issues like price and pre-existing conditions and portability and even the uninsured. So there were some of those, but okay, I think the criticism is valid. Where was the leadership to give more prominence to, Tom Price, to Phil Rowe, some of the others? They just couldn't quite get it together. And then all of a sudden, now they're in a position of leadership and have the potential of passing both it in the House and the Senate and have a Republican in the White House. Okay, where is that coming? Coverage is going to be important, I think, and premiums as well. There's some that think these premiums will go up, but I know that the only probable way that you're going to drop these premiums is to have some kind of competition, and that gets back to a variety of different things, removing some of the mandates that actually drove those costs up, having some level of competition, which would allow you to buy policies across state lines and a variety of other things. Some of that may be in the American Health Care Act. Some of that might be changed, as Susan Stamper Brown points out, but those are good examples of some things that have to take place. And your point is well taken as well. The frustration that came from the Republicans was, you pass this without even letting us read the bill until the 11th hour. Some of the amendments that came to the American Health Care Act actually came again at the 11th hour. So, not right for one to do it, not for the other. So, got some good points, but let me take some more phone calls. I see a variety of you have comments that you'd like to make today. So, let's hear your comments. Redonda in Texas, KJRT, what would you like to add to our conversation?
First thing, I think that there is a good middle ground that we could both agree on, as the Democrats and the Republicans. But it also seems like the Democrats are throwing out, well, this. If you're raped or sexually assaulted, you're going to get a higher premium. I just kind of feel like they're throwing that out there because that's something that they would have pulled off.
Yeah, and again, some of these myths, and that's why I wanted to take that one on, but there are a couple of others that I just mentioned, but the one that certainly we talked about earlier, that you would not be covered if you were a victim of rape or sexual assault, domestic violence. First of all, that's not true, and I'm hoping that I've set that aside, if for no other reason than to say that even the Washington Post, which originally allowed an op-ed to be written about this, went back and gave it for Pinocchio. So that's one important issue that I think maybe we can set aside. And this is the frustration, the fear-mongering on either side, the lack of just, can we sit down and cool some of the rhetoric off and really say what would be the most helpful for individuals, and what can we do to begin to lower cost, still provide coverage, provide, again, a topic that nobody seems to be talking about, portability. We'll talk about this tomorrow with our millennials. I mean, if you're going to have 12 to 15 different employers over your lifetime, this is nuts, that you can't have your health care policy follow you. After all, my company doesn't own my car insurance. My company doesn't own my house insurance. Why should my company own my health insurance? And that goes back to something that happened in an attempt to really sort of circumvent World War II era wage controls, and it just doesn't make any sense. Let's come back, and we're going to talk about one place where Republicans and Democrats can agree. Let me talk about one very important area right after these messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. A case out of Oklahoma mixes the doctrine of church autonomy with the intrigue of a spy novel. A Syrian man found his way to the First Presbyterian Church USA of Tulsa, Oklahoma. There he converted to Christianity and asked to be baptized. He was, and though he requested confidentiality, the church followed its Book of Church Order, listing the record of his baptism on the church's website. When the man returned to Syria, he was kidnapped, tortured, and only escaped death by killing his guard and fleeing the country. After he returned to the United States, he sued the Presbyterian Church, alleging that the publication of his baptism led to his kidnap and torture. But the Oklahoma Supreme Court declined to review the matter, citing the church autonomy doctrine. According to that doctrine, churches are free from government interference when handling its internal religious affairs, including baptism. Since it is the practice and custom of the Presbyterian Church to publicly celebrate baptisms, the court could not adjudicate the dispute. While churches must exercise wisdom in following its customs to avoid unnecessary danger, how a church decides matters of faith and practice is rightly beyond the reach of the judiciary to review. As the U.S. Supreme Court said in 1952, this doctrine, quote, radiates a spirit of freedom for religious organizations and independence from secular control or manipulation. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talking about the American Health Care Act, which is now before the United States Senate. But let me try to, for just a minute, as Rodonda pointed out, see if I can find at least one or two areas where Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives might agree. And part of this has to do with the issue of tax fairness that not a lot of people have talked about. People who get their health insurance through an employer get a tax benefit that the rest of us do not get. And matter of fact, if a worker facing a 15% FICA payroll tax, a 25% income tax rate, and maybe a 5% state tax income tax rate, essentially that doubles the cost for those individuals, and that is not fair. And a lot of it, what happens is you go all the way back to after World War II when you had wage and price controls. What happened is that employers would then provide health care benefits, and that's where we got into this problem of where your company owns your health care policy. And so as a result, there's an exclusion that those individuals benefit from this employer sponsored health insurance. Avik Rohr puts it this way. He says, in America today, we spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year subsidizing health coverage for wealthy Americans through employer tax exclusion, which disproportionately helps those in high tax brackets, and Medicare, a universal entitlement under which taxpayers are forced to fund generously subsidized government insurance for, you could say, like Warren Buffett or Mitt Romney or Bill Gates. And he points out that, these large companies sort of are addicted to this employer tax exclusion because it makes it harder for employers to leave them for maybe startup competitors. But there's a place where I think you could get both liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats, to say, at least we could stop that, because we would want to have a system that is fair, a system that does not benefit differentially the rich. And so you would see that certainly a conservative would accept that, because you would believe that we should treat everyone fairly, would be opportunity for all and favoritism towards none. You could see how a Democrat or a liberal would favor that, because this is just basically crony capitalism, and we're actually benefiting the rich. So there's just one element that I think certainly could provide an opportunity for left and right, Republican and Democrat, to support. Will that happen? I really doubt it. But I just wanted to show you that without just a whole lot of thinking and just quoting from one or two of the articles that I have, you can come up with some places where Democrats and Republicans could cooperate. Will they is, of course, another really big question. And as we've already pointed out, the American Health Care Act is a work in progress. What was passed in the House may be very different in the Senate. Matter of fact, they're talking about basically writing an entirely different bill. So this is a conversation that will be taking place for some time, but wanted to address it today because the first hour we talked about some of the myths in our popular culture. Wanted to address at least a few of them that seem to be swirling right around right now, the Health Care Act that was passed in the House. Let's go back to the phones, give a few more of you a chance to weigh in. You can agree or disagree. We'll go to Georgia on the Good News Network. David, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I sure can.
Okay. First off, watching the news, it seems to me like in Congress, the top Democrats are more concerned with protecting Obama's legacy than they are the good of the American people. They don't seem to want what's best for America. They seem to want to don't mess with Obama's legacy. And I think it goes back to when it first came out, they wouldn't let us know. You had to vote for it to find out what was in it.
Don't you remember
and
that?
Then the next thing we know, nuns had to give out prophylactics, and we're going to the Supreme Court trying to say that that Catholic hospitals should give abortion, and that every American should have the price of that abortion where they have to pay in every month, so that every American is guilty of the abortion. And it just seems to me that the whole law, the whole Obamacare, is a tainted apple, a tainted law. It needs to be thrown out, burned up, and start fresh.
One of the things that probably reinforces what you're saying is that on Sunday, we had our former president, Barack Obama, who was in Boston because he was at the Kennedy Library, which, by the way, is a great library. If you're ever in Boston, you need to go to that, the John F. Kennedy Library. And the John F. Kennedy Library Foundation gave its Profile Encourage Award for him. And that's where, in his speech, he said that it was his fervent hope that members of Congress would not essentially dismantle the particular Affordable Care Act, because think about this. I mean, that really is one of his greatest legacies. If you think about what the Obama Library will look like someday, and talking about some of his successes, front and center would be the Affordable Care Act, often called Obamacare. And if you dismantle Obamacare, that sort of dismantles, his legacy. So I understand why he has said that, why he's concerned about it. I think he maybe believes that it is better for the country, but I do also believe that some of the Democratic leaders want to move even beyond that to single payer. Of course, we talked about Jimmy Kimmel using the example of his son for single payer. I think that's where they really want to head eventually, but you're right. There seems to be a lot more concern about not dismantling the legacy than addressing some of these very real problems, which have now surfaced, David, in large part because some of these mandates and some of these regulations were geared to actually be implemented after President Obama left office. So whereas it was difficult last year with some of the premiums and some of the other issues I think it's going to be even more difficult as some of us try to get insurance this year. So we'll see how that plays out. But let me take at least one more phone call before we run out of time today. We'll go to Robert in Texas, KABX. We'll let you be the last call of the day. What would you like to add?
Do you know if the American Health Care Act, does it have the same IRS tax penalty for not having coverage as the Obamacare? Again, this is a work in progress, so what I say today could be wrong tomorrow, but it removes a lot of those taxes, and if you remember, those taxes are penalties, so it is quite possible that indeed, if it were to pass the House and the Senate, be signed by Donald Trump, right now, it looks like you would not be paying that penalty that you probably had to pay this year if you did not have an approved plan through the Affordable Care Act. Does that answer your question? For the most part, yeah. You don't know, so you don't know. So
we don't know. We know that if it passed in its present form, you wouldn't. But again, we have a Senate to go through, a reconciliation to go through, then a conference committee, and then finally a signing by the president, assuming it gets that far. And if indeed it does, then I think some of you that have had to pay penalties would not. But stay tuned, because we've got a long way to go before the American Health Care Act becomes law. Does that make sense? Simply out of time, so we'll have to cover some more of that tomorrow or in Friday's weekend edition. Tomorrow is our Millennial Roundtable, and Nick Pitts will be with us, Allie Beth Stuckey. And if you'd like to read a little bit more, we have posted a couple of articles. This one that I thought was very well written by Kevin Williamson on the right to health care. Only quoted from the first page. There's a lot more to it, because that's something we're going to be hearing a lot about. One on the issue of cleaning up the health care mess by Susan Stamper Brown. And then some other articles that we've posted about our first hour interview. And so if you did not have a chance to get through today and would like to join the conversation, we'll certainly have that opportunity on Wednesday. Thursday, we'll be talking not only about some of the issues related to millennials in terms of the phones, but also we'll have June Hunt in studio talking about families. And of course, Friday is our weekend edition. If you'd like to know a little bit more about what we've talked about today, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. And there's an opportunity for you to click on that button and join the Truth Team and help us out financially. I want to thank Andrew and Alyssa, as well as Shamila, for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. See you back here tomorrow.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View, so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.